You don't have relations with Iran. You're limiting the ability of humanity to resolve these problems. The rules of the international order are disintegrating. We are heading into more chaotic, fluid, flexible times.
Is America working?
I don't think there's a singular answer.
You don't know what Mr. Trump might decide. Now we are in an age where you have multiple centers of influence. India, it doesn't have to be choose between America and China.
Right.
America and Russia, Ukraine.
On the question of India versus China,
Why not with China?
less of an easy partner for developing countries.
India has the ability to be a leader in that role. How is a country like India not on the Security Council?
There should be no Security Council.
Has the Western mindset not worked?
There is this arrogance that the West can have.
How can we have more deliberation on how to solve the world's problems?
This is India, a story in the making, and I'm your host, Loveena Tandon.
In the words of Mark Twain, India is the cradle of human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of traditions. This India, this historical and this civilizational confidence, if I can say, India has always had. But now they are projecting it on the world stage. In a world where multipolarity is there and unipolar world is behind us, or so we believe. How is India positioning itself? What is India's place in the multipolar world? This is what we discuss today with two very eminent people. One who has had an international journalism experience, Mr. Giles Trendle, and that is Kate Sullivan Estrada, an international and a South Asia expert from the University of Oxford. Thank you very much. I got it right. Thank you so much for joining us. We are at the Bridge India Ideas for India event, and that's why we are juggling our minds for ideas for India. Thank you so much for your time. So could we first start? We hear so much about unipolar world, multipolar world. Should we define the world stage first? Go for it.
It was important to define what multipolar meant. It's how an influence is distributed among multiple players. Whereas in the past we had either one or two superpower. You know, the Cold War was two superpowers.
Right.
Now we are in an age where you have multiple centers of influence or countries with power and influence. So I guess that's the difference.
I think that's a great definition. And there's some critical definitions of the term as well. So some scholars are arguing, is this very state-centered idea sufficient, because it's not just states who wield power. We have non-state actors, we have multinational corporations. The other query I would have, just while we discuss the term, is do we actually have order at the moment at all? Are we between orders? Is the multipolar order actually in play right now? What is happening to order in general? So some sort of, I think, parallel conversations we can have rather than just taking multipolar for granted.
Actually, how would you define multipolar versus order?
I think they're describing two separate things. The multipolar describes what Giles just sort of set out for us, that we have different centers of power, and I think it implies that they are poles, as in states. And the order, I think, is that there are agreed, institutionalized understandings of how those centers of power interact. And so that is what order is, right? It's the rules of the game that generally most people agree on and abide by. And I think that is what, for me, is in flux right now.
Right. So going on with our multipolar argument, are we in a multipolar world?
I liked what you said about it's not just countries and it's not just states. Because, yes, we do have corporations that have incredible power. We have lobby groups, we have industries, we have non-state actors. And so when we mean multipolar, are we saying that is just countries? I don't think it should be necessarily that. I think there are influencers who are outside of government. And at the same time, when you said order, I think, again, the rules of the international order are disintegrating. I think you can see it in Russia, Ukraine, and Gaza, and Israel, and many other places. And with Mr. Trump pulling out of agreements, changing the way things operate, it does seem to be getting more chaotic. So I think those are the 2 points I would make on your question. Multipolar doesn't necessarily just mean countries. And yes, we are heading into more chaotic, fluid, flexible times.
Yes, indeed.
What functions does the term multipolar play for different individuals? Or different states, shall we say? So whenever a term is a kind of a catchy term, we've been talking about what is it, what work is it doing? And I think the way that India is using the term, or the Indian leadership since sort of 2014 has been using the term in conjunction with this idea that India is a leading power, is very much pushing against the idea that India will take sides in what seems to be emerging as the big kind of bifurcation in how international politics is heading, and that is the tensions between China and the United States. And saying that we believe in a multipolar order, we want to be a leading power, is essentially saying we will not defer to either side of a kind of pre-configured conflict. We're on our own side, I think, as External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has said on a number of occasions. So for India, I think this is about staking a claim to a significant global role, and one that is not in the shadow of any superpower. It's quite a bold and assertive claim about India's role. The United States talks about multipolarity, maybe as a way of justifying the way that it's withdrawing from certain spheres of influence, and having less of a big global footprint. We know that Trump has this kind of America first view of the world. So it's doing some kind of political work. It's about staking certain kinds of claims and identities. So I think that's kind of the stuff that interests me, really, about that we're interested in when we use these terms.
I just feel that you're right in saying that India is trying to define its own space of how we want to be perceived, tapping on their civilizational or the past or historical moment when they had their moment, and they're wanting to bring that to the forefront. Do you see that happening, and how do you see the world is perceiving that?
Well, the multipolarity, I think there are other countries that are showing that you can be allied or friends or engaging with all players. You don't have to choose one side or another. I spent many years in the Gulf, in places like Qatar, and you look at some of the Gulf states, they are showing that they do have these multiple allegiances and alliances, and there can be a benefit to that. So if India, it doesn't have to be choose between America and China, America and Russia, Ukraine. And I think there's a way to develop that and make it a strength in this multipolar, if that's what we're saying, world. I think that can be used, if it's used correctly, I think it can be used as a strength. And I think choosing one side or another could potentially have its disadvantages, as we're seeing.
Yeah.
Look at NATO.
Yes.
You don't know what Mr. Trump might decide.
Yes.
He might wake up one day and decide, you know what, as has been said, we're not going to support Europe in the same way. So I think it's, given the chaos that we talked about and the disorder, I think it's best to be kind of in with everybody to hedge your bets. And
How do you see that kind of step and positioning, that the world is fluid and we are going to just play to our strengths and assess each situation as it comes and not define our friends and foes very clearly?
I think it's a sound strategy to insulate yourself against a very fluid global scenario and unpredictable leaderships. And I think it's really a time-tested strategy, actually. I mean, India has sought to be, it used to be called non-alignment, but India has been kind of multi-aligned, I think, from the beginning. It didn't have no relations with the United States during the Cold War. And certainly its relations with the Soviet Union sort of warmed up, certainly after 1971. So I think this idea of having a kind of nimble positioning is a smart one. I think that the it's now perhaps coming from a position of strength and greater political, economic, military power than during the Cold War. And I think that there are still some elements of that positioning which are productive in the sense that they don't further, solidify tensions. So it's very clear looking at how Chinese scholars are making sense of India's role, for example, in the Indo-Pacific. And they're very interested in whether India is really gradually sort of hitching its wagon to a US kind of containment project, or whether India is taking a sort of slightly more, a step back, a slightly more nuanced and maybe independent position, because that will really determine, I think, how China responds to India. So India has realities in its region, its neighborhood, but also in the wider Indo-Pacific space. That mean it doesn't really make sense to take on the enemy image of the United States, to take on the responsibility of having to say, join the US if there's China invades Taiwan. These are very pressing risks. So I think being nimble and non-committed in that sense is very valuable. But I think the other connotation of multipolar is that you have centers of power who are not just hedging their bets, but should ideally be collectively responding to global problems and problems of global governance, like, for example, climate change, governance of the oceans, many big issues that are on our agenda and horizon. So the question is not just what are you avoiding, I think, but what can you actively contribute?
And what do you think actively is being contributed?
Well, the diplomatic agility that you mentioned, the nimbleness is key. I think India is fantastically well placed. There are 22 official languages in India and 300 languages. I mean, if that is not internal multipolarity within India itself. So I think it's really important that, yes, alliances, because everybody's going to need to work together on certain topics, climate change being one of them. I think India is fantastically well placed to take major steps and help the world lead in that, because we do need, as a world, we need to be talking to China, we need to be talking to Russia, we need to be talking to Iran, we need to be talking to Saudi Arabia, we need to be talking to everybody to solve these global problems that are problems beyond borders. So if as a country you don't have relations with Iran, or if as a country you're not talking to Saudi or you're not talking to Russia, you're limiting the ability of humanity to resolve these problems. And so I think India can be a fantastic leader in this. Yes,
Pointing to the
yes, there you go. India is fantastically well placed for this.
So how do you assess the position? How has it done till now in that bridging arena?
Well, I think India's always had a policy of non-alignment and this idea of strategic autonomy. So, there was I think a comment today about how India does need to take sides and it would help in dealing with Pakistan. But I think India has had a very wise, this strategic autonomy, this non-alignment, this being open to the multipolarity. Personally, I think that's where we need to be going, and bringing everybody together to work together to deal with these problems.
Am I hearing it right if I say that the kind of stance that India has taken is working for them and the world?
I think it's going to be working for the world more and more. I wouldn't want to say, but I think it's in this day and age and in the state that we're in, we have global problems that go beyond borders and that are going to involve everybody, and I mean every nation, sitting down together, talking together, resolving. And there's no point, we can't do that if we're not talking to that country, or we're not talking to those people, or we don't like them, we've got a problem with them. So I think India has the ability to be a leader in that role.
In the global south, even as compared to China?
Why not with China?
Yeah. Okay. That's what you've been saying. India is in the global stage as the world leader. How they're trying to project themselves. How's it showing up as a world leader?
I think An answer to that question needs to be very nuanced and very situated in particular domains of policy, and also reflect on history as well. So I don't think there's a singular answer, right? Just like, the United States is causing all kinds of mayhem in some domains, but maybe other things are going quite well, right? We can't give a totalizing answer. I think there are challenges that face India, because India did spend a lot of the Cold War period being a champion for what was then called the Third World, that language we don't use anymore, but for the developing world. And we've seen some echoes of that in, I think, India's hosting of the G20 summit recently. But what was clear, I think, in that period is that India shared many challenges. It was an economy in transition, a society in transition, a very diverse country dealing with internal security challenges, dealing with poverty, many issues that I think sort of solidified those relations with other states that were, finding their feet after decolonization as independent states. Now, India's economy is now the fourth largest in the world. This is a country that has gone through, a major economic growth miracle, and still struggles with problems of poverty, still struggles with, inequality, but perhaps is less of an easy partner for developing countries than it once was. So one example might be climate change. India once was very active, pushing for common but differentiated responsibilities between developed and developing nations. Now we have a cluster of small island, ocean states who are seeing sea levels rising, on their shorelines. And of course, they are really concerned about big economies like India, who is now, a significant emitter. And India, of course, is defending its right to have its own carbon space to develop and grow. So I think that there are tensions which are structural, which have to do with India's size and how much it's grown economically, that mean that leadership sometimes is a bit tricky. But arguably, India has a recent enough experience of some of these challenges that there is that recognition and that understanding. And on the question of India versus China, I think the more that India is able to present itself as, a really functioning democracy with a free media, where there are civil liberties, where there is success in an experiment of a very plural society, the more that is on display and the more that is projected, the more attractive India is to many countries. I think it's that attractiveness over China that India really
Got to play up to. They have to
should
play
up. Yeah.
play
Absolutely.
up more. And I think climate change is absolutely a different kind of topic, but there's a lot of nuanced thing in that, because having covered COPs, one feels that it's not as simple as saying that India would do it, and because the global finance is not working in the favor of global South, and it's very hard to bring both of them on the table and say who's ready to compromise where. Exactly. And that's what no COP really achieves. It's my angst.
And the loss and damage agenda is, it's great that that's taken off, but where does India stand on that? Because on the one hand, India is going to face a huge share of loss and damage, as the climate change.
And they do.
And they do, of course.
And Pakistan has.
But then as a large economy, of course, there's pressure then for India to contribute more.
So I think...
And does it go historically? Because, the UK, the US are historically the biggest emitters.
Yes, and that's the problem actually, because when you talk of small sustainabilities, and I don't want it to completely become climate change thing, but it's important. Sustainability has been in the grain of the culture.
And India has a young, highly well-educated, very energized, a lot of expertise. I think India has a lot to give.
There's no other country that has that level of complexity in terms of its structure. When we look at India and when we judge India, what is it that the world needs to notice, you having gone both of you to India, in order to make that judgment? What is it that you would like to tell maybe that this is how one should look at India and from this lens?
So I've been to India several times, and I've always had amazing. I've been in the south and I've been in the north, and yeah, what an incredible country, and how diverse.
Yes.
And as I mentioned, 33 or 30 different languages, 33 different official languages, 200 different languages.
Yes.
And yet English language is, and this is where maybe India is different from China, is
Yes.
India is used to the English language.
Yes.
And I think that's a great strength in dealing with the outside world. This ability to communicate with the outside world that maybe China doesn't have the same. And I'm not just talking about in the foreign ministry, but on the street level. I think India has had a lot more engagement with the outside world. India has a diaspora around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in the Gulf where there's huge diaspora. You've got the diaspora here. And you've seen it in the, we've had a prime minister with an Indian heritage. So I think India comes with a lot of a strength and heritage in being able to deal and understanding the outside world and being able to engage with the outside world and help the outside world understand all of those complexities. This diplomatic initiative that Prime Minister Modi has sent out. Now, there were some comments about, we don't need anyone's permission to hit Pakistan. But diplomatic outreach is critical. It goes back to reach out to everybody, reach out to your friends, reach out to people you're maybe not traditionally friendly with. You've got to reach out and engage with the world, because if that's the multipolar world, I think that's the way to deal within the multipolar world. Doesn't mean you're asking permission to do anything, but you're engaging. So engagement.
More engagement.
Yeah.
I think the most consequential engagement with Indian thinking for me was during my master's dissertation, which I did at the University of Heidelberg at the South Asia Institute. And I read Gandhi's autobiography, so the story of my experiments with truth.
Wow.
And I gave it a lot of time, and I also gave the secondary literature around it a lot of time. And I think what is absolutely fascinating about his account of truth, especially at this moment, right, we're supposedly in a post-truth era, is that there is an absolute truth which we can never really grasp, but that's the otherworldly, the godliness, that's the sort of beyond the human plane. All we can ever aspire to is relative truth. So get as close as possible to the absolute truth. And his prescription for how we do that is through contentious conversations, right? You find someone who thinks differently to you. You have a really deep and open conversation with them. You listen to them. You try to understand their viewpoint. You try to express yours. And you do it with empathy and compassion. And his argument essentially in that book, at least my interpretation of it, is that we're all just trying to get closer to truth. And the best way to do that is by interacting, by discussing, by deliberating, and being open to other people's viewpoints. And for me, it sits within a much longer tradition within the Indian canon of public deliberation being really, really important. Of people being able to express the views of themselves, their groups, their communities, and others having the humility to listen and try to understand their viewpoints. And for every meeting between you and me, that each of us leaves the meeting having changed ourselves a little bit through the interaction. And it's that constant iteration of your identity growing and changing, never going in and having a fixed position, always being open and willing to learn. And creating a space where people can have those open conversations and where they truly are seeking for a closer and closer position
To the truth. Beautiful. Well said.
And if I may add to that, I think the issue of getting a seat on the Security Council.
Yes.
I think the Security Council needs to open up, the United Nations Security Council. And why do we still now have only 5 seats? And why? How is a country like India not on the council?
On it. 4th largest economy and not a seat in the, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I think this is where the angst comes from, if I can be that why is there no recognition and acknowledgement, I suppose.
Well, maybe there is, and maybe there's some people who don't want other countries on the. No one can deny that India is now hugely, a big player, economy, military, in all sorts of ways, technology. So
then why not? Why do you read?
Well, maybe it's a closed circle. Maybe it's a clique. Maybe there are interests at play. I don't know, of not wanting to expand the Security Council. But I think many world leaders have spoken about the need to expand the Security Council.
Indeed. Okay, so
just to add to that, I mean, it's interesting, as someone who has painstakingly read through all of the speeches that Indian representatives have given about Security Council reform. And it's very interesting that the material measures of power are never the reasons that are given for why India deserves a seat on the UN Security Council, right? It's about the demographics, it's about the size. It's often just about India being, a country that wants to, I think, represent lots of different opinions and bring those to the Security Council. These are the claims that are made by members of the Indian diplomatic service and other politicians who give these speeches. And it comes, I think, from a sense that there isn't sufficient representation for the world in that space, and that through India's diversity, that would bring in itself its internal diversity a degree of representation, but also through its status as a country that has obviously been a developing country and a non-Western sort of significant power, that there is something that it would bring.
And so you're for it?
I'm conflicted as always on these issues, because I do feel that once you start expanding the Security Council, I'm not saying it's perfect as it is, it's far from that, but on what grounds do you expand it? And I think we see the problems in all of the coalitions for and against that expansion and the form that it should take. An interesting position, which is that there should be no Security Council, there should be no kind of
no NATO, no Security Council.
Not
we know where we are going.
I think it's more that no state should have the right to decide huge, significant issues of peace and security. That all states should be involved in those important decisions. Now, it's not very practical, but what I'm saying is that we don't necessarily need to limit ourselves to should India be admitted or not. I think that moment of change will necessarily involve a huge number of debates about the form that this particular body would and should take. So it's almost a kind of abstract discussion.
Okay, yeah, because we're saying it's not working. The world is fluid and flexible, so let's flex and change.
Yeah, the UN Security Council is not working. It's not working.
Yeah, no.
Maybe the General Assembly. That's is a General Assembly, so that's where everybody has the right that they're say. But
we're already changing.
It's congealed. There are vetoes. It's not working.
It's not.
And when it does work, there's quite a lot of anxiety about it working, because there was that period at the end of the Cold War where suddenly many resolutions were being passed, and there were great fears of overreach. So one has to be careful what one wishes for, right?
Is America working? Are they still pulling the strings? Are they still the world leaders? Are they still the boss? As definitely Trump would like to believe. We are quiet.
Okay, well, I know that look. It's like, you go first.
Oh, it's my great ability to cue. I'm queuing
Okay.
for my answer.
Let's just look at the university issue. Mr. Trump now going after the universities, going after organizations that are scientific organizations, closing them down, defunding them. I think this is not the way to go if you wanted to be a player on the world stage. And I think it's limiting itself. And why would you close off to international students? Why would you make it so difficult for them to come to your country and study in your country? Not just study in your country, learn about your country, learn about the culture. I think it's very short-sighted, and I think it's going to give up a leading position in the long run to other countries.
So you think boss is not behaving?
I think boss is self-harming.
In the last century, we have had the mishap of Iraq, Afghanistan. So has it not worked? Has the Western mindset not worked? And has it created a space for another mindset? Let's say the Eastern philosophy or the Asian.
So I was in Iraq during that terrible time reporting, and even before the West went into Iraq, it was so clear that it was going to be a disaster. It was so clear because the way the West was going in, we're going to bring you democracy. No, you don't understand the region. You don't understand how to deal with that region. You don't know what's going. It was so obvious what was going to happen, and yet Mr. Bush, Mr. Blair, they couldn't seem to see it, even though a lot of people were telling them this is going to be a big problem. And of course, it played out that way. So I think there is this arrogance that the West can have, and I think it's got to get over that. So it's been arrogant in many other countries as well. And I think that's very short-sighted. And I think the West will eventually learn through its own self-harm, it's dealing in a more multipolar world. It needs to be different.
So, Kate, have we then created a situation where there is space because either they get over the arrogance or there is a space and there is multipolarity and they have more mind, and therefore India is pushing itself in?
You've probably gathered by now that I'm not very good at simple, straight, snappy answers. What I would say is that I don't think the West is a monolith. I don't think India is a monolith. And at the end of the day, it's about the narratives that win out. So what can we do so that the kinds of great power managerialism, which has been arrogant and also has, I think, had limited literacy of different parts of the world, how can we make sure that whichever leaders step up next, that they don't make the same mistakes, that they don't assume that a superior position where they think their worldview is the most important and needs to be disseminated? How can we have more deliberation on how to solve the world's problems in a less hierarchical way? I think that's the challenge that lies before us. So I would caution against wanting one power to usurp another, because I think the tendency will be to make the same kinds of mistakes again and again. So what does a radically different model for leadership look like?
Your last word then on the multipolar world and India's positioning. Make the judgment.
India has a great tradition and great potential to be able to operate and deal with and even lead in this multipolar world.
I would say that parts of the world are declining and losing their power and are perhaps mired in pessimism. And parts of the world are rising and are growing in dynamism and have optimism. And I think it's in the latter parts of the world. They may not be necessarily nation states, they might be groups across states. That's where the energy is. That's where the creative ideas will come from. And I envisage India as large and as important and with such plural traditions to be a major part of that creative, constructive energy.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go on to our High Five India. This is a special High Five India segment in which I'll ask you snappy questions. Usually I'd say rapid fire, but I'm not expecting you to be that rapid with your fire.
That's a big challenge for you.
Oh, no.
I have to be truly British, huh?
Exactly.
And the reward for you is the high five.
From you?
Yes, from me.
What, actually?
Actually.
Okay.
Be prepared to cut this segment because I will not be good at it. And how to high five.
Multipolar ways to high five. All right. What is your idea for India that will work for the world?
I think using its population to move forward in ways that will improve the world, in education and technology, in green energy. I think India has a lot to offer there.
India for you in one word.
Warmth.
Diversity.
What is it about India that you have enjoyed the most?
I've been in India several times, but what I loved about India was hiking in the Silent Valley in Kerala.
Hospitality.
The most favorite Indian food?
Dal.
Palak paneer.
Can you make it?
Badly, yes.
Okay.
Why is India not good at football?
Why is India not good at football? Go on.
Yeah, it's a huge country. And why is India never in the World Cup?
Actually, the question is, how come Britain gave cricket to India?
And we lose all the time.
Excelled it, and it's the football. It's coming up, I think.
It's a story of class.
Yeah.
I think cricket is a sport of the upper classes, and football was previously a sport of the working classes. This is what sports historians have said to me. And therefore, football was not introduced in the same way as the upper class sports like rugby and cricket.
So cricket is a colonial heritage, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. If there was one historical figure that you could go back and meet, who would you meet and what would you ask and why?
I'm fascinated by a guy called Imam Shamil, who was a guerrilla leader in Chechnya in the 19th century, fighting the Russians.
And what would you ask?
I would ask him about his amazing ability to go on amid adversity.
What made him go amid adversity?
Because he was leading a small group of people against this massive country, and yet he did amazing things.
For me, it'd be Ashoka, because the history of his written texts and treatises and thinking has been, really hard to kind of uncover and explore. And yet it seems he had an incredible sort of view of how to embrace different kinds of beliefs and thoughts, and which I find very inspiring. I'd love to hear it from the horse's mouth.
Thank you. I think we've done it. Go on.
Okay, wow!
Got it. Thank you.